This episode of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast is brought to you by Legacy Staffs, which are crafted by the Brazos Walking Stick Company in Waco, Texas. You can go to brazosticks.com and use the name MacPayne, one word, at the checkout and get 10% off your next order of the Legacy Staff or cane of your own design.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1821 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. In this episode, I'm going to tell you a very interesting story about a CIA pilot in the Vietnam War. Officially, they did not exist. They flew around in aircraft like C-123s and UH-1 Hueys. This story grabbed my interest for several reasons. Number one, it comes out of God's country, meaning Northwest Florida. Northwest Florida is the best kept secret in America. It is a wonderful place up there, and the people that live there do their best to try and not let other people know about it. The Northwest Florida I'm referring to include places like Pensacola, Fort Walton Beach, Niceville, Destin, Crestview, Baghdad, Florida, that is. For many years, I would go by Pensacola, traveling east and west on I-10. As you went past Pensacola, you would see the sign of Pensacola, but I never went there until recently. I had to go there on a mission, supporting the Blue Water Navy Vietnam veterans. I went to several of those towns out there, got to know the place and meet the people. One time I was in a very, very nice place in downtown Pensacola in one of those old, beautiful buildings that had been remodeled into a very nice eating and drinking establishment. While there, I spoke to numerous people, commenting on what a wonderful place Pensacola is, the city, the beaches, and everything. I said, it's too bad more people don't know about it. Every one of those people said, don't tell a soul. We don't want more people to know about it because it is such a nice place. We don't want a lot of escapees from New York City or Chicago, Illinois coming down here and screwing the place up. Hopefully, the whole city of New York will not move down there. That's one of the reasons the story I'm going to share with you grabbed my attention. Another reason it had to do with a pilot from the Vietnam War. I had the extreme privilege of being allowed to fly Cobra gunships with the 101st Airborne Division in the Vietnam War. I discovered something that Winston Churchill once said that is absolutely true. Winston Churchill said there's no greater thrill in life than being shot at without success. He was right. He knew what he was talking about. I was further blessed to be able to fly Cobra gunships with an aerial rocket artillery unit. That meant about the only time we ever flew was mostly on fire missions when people were in trouble and we had to go out there and support them, and sometimes would fly a few LZ preps. Looking back on it, flying a Cobra gunship with A Battery 4th of the 77th Field Artillery up there in I-Corps and engaging the enemy when they would be firing at me with those 50 caliber machine guns, and those red traces would be flying by like needles in the air, and we would take them on and we would start firing those rockets down on them, one after another, and pretty soon those red tracers stopped coming up. That indicated to me that we had knocked out those little yellow fellows down there. And it was a wonderful thought. Those times used to be everything to me. I enjoyed it a lot. Well, who wouldn't enjoy something like that? I had a little connection with Air America over there in Vietnam. On more than one occasion at our refuel point up at Phu Bai, not too far from Camp Eagle, the headquarters of the 101st, we'd be there refueling, and suddenly we would look up, and here would be a Huey approaching our refuel point. It had a very interesting paint job. The top of it was blue and the bottom of it was silver. Definitely not Army. Something else about that strange aircraft got our attention. In the Army, they beat us over the head all the time with some of these rules we had to follow when we flew. We always had to have our flight suits buttoned all the way up to the top to keep our necks from burning up. We always had to wear gloves. We could never fly without gloves, and we had to have our sleeves rolled down so we would be totally covered up just in case we were in a fire. Being obedient Army pilots, we did that all the time. I remember the first time I saw a CIA Huey fly in to refuel. They came in and hovered about 20 feet up. We were always told, you can't hover higher than 3 feet or you'll crash and burn. Here was this strange-looking helicopter hovering about 20 feet up above us. He picked out a spot and he slowly came down. I noticed that the pilot was wearing a very spiffy, short-sleeved white shirt with those fancy little epaulets on it that you see in civilian airlines. And he was not wearing gloves. I thought, now that's the way to do it. Fly in here with short sleeves on, no gloves, hover at 20 feet, refuel, and take off. That was one of my first introductions to Air America in Vietnam, and I was impressed. That's another reason I'm going to share this story with you. There's a retired Air America pilot that lives out in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, out there in God's country, who was the pilot in that helicopter that landed on top of a building in Saigon right there at the end in 1975 when the NVA were taking over the town. Everybody's seen that picture. It shows all the people going up the ladder. Many people had the misguided impression that that was American military trying to get out of there because the communists were coming in. Nothing could be further from the truth. All those people on that ladder were Vietnamese trying to get out of there. The Air America pilot I'm going to tell you about is Bob Caron, spelled C-A-R-O-N. He was flying that aircraft, getting as many of the Vietnamese out of there as possible because they knew what was in store for them once the commies came to town. Bob Caron has a very interesting story to tell, but it still has an unfinished final chapter. I think you're going to find this very interesting about what these CIA pilots had to go through and what they're still going through today. It is a great story. The story comes from the Northwest Florida Daily News, right there in Fort Walton Beach. Helicopter pilot in iconic Vietnam photo says full story still unfolding. The story was written and submitted by Jim Thompson, a writer for the Northwest Florida Daily News. I encourage you to go over to the podcast website, VietnamVeteranNews.com. Check out episode 1821, and there you will see a picture of Bob Caron himself holding a picture that shows the aircraft he was flying and all the South Vietnamese trying to escape on it. Also in the background of the picture, you will see an image of Bob standing in front of his distinctively painted CIA Huey. Looks like he could still be flying those Hueys today. But he has some important business that needs to be concluded as soon as possible, which you're going to discover as I share this story with you. Without any further ado, let's take a look at it. Again, the title of the story is Helicopter Pilot in Iconic Vietnam Photo Says Full Story Still Unfolding. What might that be? Well, let's take a look and see what it is. Dateline, Fort Walton Beach. Taken from the top floor of the nearby Saigon Hotel, the photograph of a helicopter perched precariously on a rooftop as dozens of South Vietnamese citizens waited desperately to climb aboard quickly became one of the iconic images of the Vietnam War. We just stuffed them in, remembered Bob Caron, who piloted the helicopter along with the co-pilot Jack Hunter as Saigon fell to the North Vietnamese. Caron, now living on a quiet residential street in beautiful Fort Walton Beach, Florida, estimated that there were 15 people aboard the helicopter when it lifted off the roof of the Pittman building, home to some of the few Americans remaining in Saigon. Of course, 15 Vietnamese on your aircraft wasn't that bad because I don't think any Vietnamese over there in Vietnam weighed more than 100 pounds. So he was okay, obviously, because he made it out. Continuing with the story. Caron and Hunter had been sent to the Pittman building to evacuate a high-ranking South Vietnamese official and his family. But as word got out that a helicopter was coming, dozens of other South Vietnamese raced to the building for a chance at evacuation. In all that day, Caron guesses that he flew 150 people to safety aboard American ships just off the coast of Vietnam. The April 29, 1975 image captured by United Press International photographer Hubert Van S. was among the last pictures sent out of Saigon as the city fell to the North Vietnamese forces, effectively ending America's controversial years-long involvement in the conflict. Some years later, investigative work by People magazine, which included examination of other photographs taken that day and some expert analysis, proved conclusively that it was Bob Caron's helicopter. Yet for Bob, the story of that day remains unfinished, although there are hints that a final chapter may be coming, which everybody listening to this podcast can provide assistance in closing that final chapter. So, be ready. Continuing with the story. Caron, a West Point graduate, was an Army pilot in Vietnam who, while the war was still going on, became part of Air America, a supposedly private air transport company that, in reality, was an instrument of the Central Intelligence Agency. Throughout the Korean War, the Cold War, and the Vietnam War, pilots and crew members with the government-owned corporation were used in countless covert operations. The work in Vietnam, Caron said, was very hush-hush, with instructions to pilots and crew members often being little more than, "Go there, meet so-and-so, and do what he tells you." Everybody in Vietnam knew about Air America, who owned them, and what they were doing. It was just very difficult to keep anything secret over there. Even the days when they were going to convert versions of the MPC to new versions, it was supposed to be top secret, but the Vietnamese always knew about it. Continuing, there was little doubt about what was going on at Air America, not least because its offices were located right alongside military flight units at Tan Son Nhut Air Base just outside of Saigon. Everybody knew. It wasn't a secret, Caron said during a Thursday interview at his home, where the decor includes a color painting based on the black and white UPI photo from nearly a half a century ago. Regardless, the CIA worked hard to maintain the fiction that Air America was a private company. As part of the ruse, the agency kept its employees off of federal pension rolls, Caron said, to eliminate any hint of a paper trail that might link Air America to the U.S. government and its top intelligence agency. For young Air America employees like Caron, he was in his 30s at the time, in the midst of the Vietnam War. Whether or not they were going to one day be eligible for a federal pension wasn't much of a consideration. "We never gave it a thought," Caron said. "We were told to fly." They were probably concentrating more on trying to stay alive rather than a pension. Continuing. And fly they did. Caron remembers one 16-hour stretch where he did not leave his helicopter. The long hours were punctuated by danger. Caron was shot down once. And he also remembered one incident when a mission's departure route took him directly across anti-aircraft guns. As long as they weren't shooting at you, it's no problem. Continuing. And in the days before the evacuation of Saigon, as word got out that the end was near, Air America pilots tested rooftops across the city for their ability to hold a helicopter and accommodate passenger loading. Suitable rooftops were marked with an X to guide pilots flying evacuation missions, but suitable was often a relative concept. For instance, Carroll said landing on the roof of the Pittman building put his helicopter dangerously close to ventilation pipes and other obstructions that could have had disastrous consequences for a landing. That's right. When you crash a helicopter, all sorts of catastrophic things happen. Number one, you got those big blades above you flying around, and when they hit the ground, they usually rip out the transmission. Then you've got the little tail rotor at the end. That thing can cut heads off, along with the main rotor. So it would have been a big disaster if he hit one of those ventilation pipes with his tail rotor. Continuing. We flew a lot of dangerous missions, Caron said. That is probably the biggest reason they weren't thinking about pensions at the time. Continuing. And since those dangerous missions were undertaken on behalf of the U.S. government, Caron and other Air America personnel came to believe they were entitled to federal pension benefits. Their case was bolstered a decade later when unclassified CIA documents confirmed that Air America personnel were in fact federal government employees. So why don't they just give them the pension? It's never that easy with the government. I discovered that when I was working with the Blue Water Navy Vietnam Veterans Association, trying to get Agent Orange benefits for that group of veterans. Continuing with the story. But according to background information from the office of Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, U.S. intelligence and personnel officials have concluded that congressional action is necessary to get the federal benefits to the former Air America personnel. Sounds like typical government bureaucracy at work. Continuing. In all, Air America employed several hundred people during its existence, and nearly 300 were killed while working in designated war zones, according to information from Rubio's office. Caron spent more than 8 years with Air America, but in the years since, he hasn't bothered to calculate how much he might be owed in pension payments. I haven't given it much thought, to tell you the truth, he said. And in the end, he added, it's not the money that matters, but the principle of the thing. He's got a point there. They were federal employees operating in a war zone. They're entitled to it. Continuing. For Caron and other Air America employees, that principle could be upheld in legislation introduced on July the 30th, 2020 in the U.S. Senate by Rubio. The bipartisan proposal, the Air American Act of 2020, is co-sponsored by none other than Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, who is a Democrat, along with Senator Rubio, who is a Republican. That bill also has a list of more than a dozen other co-sponsors from both parties. That is highly unusual in this day and time to get anything bipartisan through Congress. I'd like to see them do it. That's where you come in. Call your senator and ask them to support the Air America Act of 2020. Continuing. According to the bill, which, if passed, would make Air America employees eligible for federal retirement benefits, those employees were retroactively excluded from the federal definition of employee years after their service with Air America ended. The brave men and women employed by Air America who conducted covert operations during the Cold War, Korean War, and Vietnam War were critical to U.S. efforts Rubio said in a statement announcing introduction of the bill, which had not, as of Friday, been assigned to any Senate committee for initial action. In his comments on the bill, Senator Warner noted that Air America was on call until the end of the Vietnam War, including flying the last helicopters out of Saigon, where they evacuated Vietnamese civilians and the U.S. Embassy. It is time they be honored with the recognition they deserve and the grateful thanks of a nation. Hear, hear. Notwithstanding the legislative proposal, Caron worries that the Vietnam War is slipping from the American memory. To tell you the truth, it seems like everybody's forgotten Vietnam, Caron said. It's gone. They don't care. Have no fear about that, Bob. The Vietnam Veteran News podcast will continue as long as I can speak to tell people about the Vietnam War and brave people like yourself who served there. Continuing. Still, Caron would like to see the Air America Act become law, and he recognizes that public sentiment might play a role in getting it passed. To that end, as the Thursday interview wound down, Caron had a question of his own. Could you maybe ask readers to call their congressman, he asked. Bob, don't worry about it. I'm going to tell everybody I know and encourage everybody who listens to this podcast to get in touch with their congressman and senator and tell them to approve the Air America Act of 2020. That's the least we can do. I remember flying numerous CCN missions out of Quang Tri, and we would be doing things with Air America, and I saw how brave all those pilots were. And I have to this day maintained the highest regard for what they did over in Vietnam. It's the least we can do is pass this act so you can get some pension money out of it. And as you said, it's not just the money, it's the principle of the thing. Bob Caron, thank you so much for your service to your country in the Air America operation in Vietnam. We greatly appreciate it. On behalf of a grateful country, I hereby issue you unofficial Vietnam Veteran News Podcast salute for your service to your country. Thank you very much, and we wish you the best up there in God's country of Fort Walton Beach. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1821 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. You are cordially invited to return again soon and often to listen to more that will be coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?